Good evening, everyone. This is Rillian on the mic for 2_MK. There's no restream today, but the audio should be coming mostly from my side unless I have some reason to hand off the mic. We're having our Kame House lobbies today, and I'll be giving whatever advice is needed between it, the matches that is. If you care to join us, the password is 2717, and we are in the East Coast Lobby 2, US. In Ring Match, First Lobby 02. Look for the Cyberman standing outside Kame House. So if you drop by in the chat, let me know what you're working on. If you happen to join, we can do some stuff to see if we can all learn together. So we are starting direct battle. So once again, the team is still working through basics. OmniRapid is more familiar with the game's intricacies and combos than the rest of us, but basics is something that you tend to have to work on together with anyone you have in your scene, or opponents you can find online who are willing to have multiple longer sets with you. To understand this game, there are 4 factors you have to understand from the start. First is the super dash and how to deal with it. The second is how to use your meter to keep your opponent at bay or change the situation. How and when to use your assists. And the times you use for your Vanish and Sparking Blast, which are not necessarily directly related to each other, but the thinking that goes into them tends to be very similar. After that, you can work on character-specific stuff, But a lot of character-specific stuff exists within that space, so you have to think about it that way. For most of us, it's actually okay not to try to do too much of the complex stuff at the beginning. Just do all the stuff that you feel should be done, even if by most standards it's either a beginner strategy or functionally a bad one, because at least then you'll learn why it's a bad one and when you can continue to use it. There are some situations in which things that are otherwise bad strategies turn out to be good if you understand how to apply them. If you're really attached to an idea, spend some time thinking about how to use that idea better, rather than just stopping using it because someone tells you, oh, you shouldn't do that, it's unsafe. Understanding the flow of this game in terms of when to force your opponent to switch out, when to switch out your own characters, opportunities for that, and of course character choice, which is a different matter altogether. That's how you get yourself started.
Are you ready?
So based on that, some good strategies that you can see built up here that are probably not going to be lost. The team's probably not going to give up on these. Is Omni-Rabbit's ability to convert off of a Trunks hit into using 2 bars to get Gohan in and therefore preserve Trunks while having a powered up Gohan. And Just Fine's ability to spend a fairly long time on Cell because of the way that Cell tends to take damage. He can generally keep himself in for a while before anyone has to come in to support him, making him a different type of point character for a lot of people. He's a character that can force your opponent to respond to a lot of things, and using that to test their reactions, get a good idea of how they play. Because once you have that idea, you can do a lot with it. Just finding a defensive player will tend to spend more time using her assist defensively, and quite a lot of time learning to carry out of certain things, using the deflect to give herself space. Whereas Omni Rabbit's usual style is rushdown when he has pressure, and defense when he doesn't. Something he's actually working on, making sure that that doesn't become the only thing he can do. But this game gives you a lot of endurance, so you should only spend a lot of time thinking about how to use it at the beginning of the round, and that's what helps you choose your point character to make sure that you don't have that problem. Part of the game's visual design is intended to help you with this, specifically that your meter values are shown in colors, allowing you to very quickly keep, even on the periphery of your vision, a clear idea of how much meter you have and what you can do, as long as you can remember to make sure that you're looking at your own side of the screen. Another important thing to note for those of us who have assists that hit from very far away, and are therefore likely to be called in those situations to defend you, do remember that your assist does not actually finish their attack if the character that called the assist actually takes damage. So for certain people, this is kind of a big problem. If you use your assist for keep away defense, you might need to pay more attention to that when you end up deciding to do that and your opponent has just then decided to come in close and manages to clip you before you can actually get it off. Another point which I mentioned on Tuesday is that when you use your Sparking Blast early in a match, usually probably on your second character, it can help you a lot because it does speed up the time it takes for your assists to recharge. So despite the shorter duration, depending on your situation, don't hesitate to have that use for it.
The battle's about to start. Good luck! It's all or nothing.
Keeping up with a very shifty opponent is also a very difficult part of this game. Understanding matchups and matchup data for any given character is hard enough in itself without having to deal with the idea that your opponent can constantly switch which character you have to be remembering things for. So let's focus on what happens when there's only one character to deal with and you know most of their stuff. And they've got nothing too special. You still have just basic idea of hit, how hit fights, and what you need to do with it. At that point, it becomes a lot more manageable because you don't have to think about everything that you could be facing. There are no assists to save them, no super confusing mix-ups you have other than those innate to the character. And even if they have a lot of meter, it's generally not enough to save them from a lot of your stuff. However, that leads you to the other situation where you think that it's easy to move in on them because now they've got less resources. This isn't usually the case for the last character in someone's team though, because they are usually set up such that they have the strongest ability to deal with that situation.
Are you ready?
This is usually bad for you because your opponent will eventually figure out that you have this approach to their stuff. And once they understand it and learn the timing for the defense, your mix-ups tend to disappear. But it is of course still very generally tempting to solve particular problems in particular ways. And you shouldn't necessarily not do this. Just be aware that doing it will cause eventually you to have certain problems.
One of which problems is apparently network issues. Well, are you back online then, William? Alright, seems it was just a blip then.
なんだか戦い方をテストされてる気分。頑張ったからあんまり怒らない。フィージャンプ。先生、未来の自分を倒してさらに俺様は強くなるんだぜ。
It's all or nothing. Fight it out. ださい。バカる。
結構やるじゃん。これでも少しは腕を上げたんだからさ。
A fierce showdown is about to begin. Are you ready? Go! Vegeta! Win!
何が目的かは知らんが、俺が貴様を信用することなどない。
Anyway, we can't hear really in on stream, so we're going to have to look into that for a moment here.
It's so easy to forget that part. Since the party kicks me out and therefore I come back, I have to reset that part. But I'm still talking about the same thing, so it shouldn't be too bad. So the previous observation, which none of you have heard, is actually that the way Just Fine recovers from a lot of things involves using Super Dash because she's been hit into the air. And I haven't been able to react with the crouch heavy that is normally used for these things, for many reasons. The answer, therefore, is to figure out what I can do instead if I'm expecting it, but I don't feel as if I've got enough time to make sure I've got it right. Fortunately, my specific characters have the ability to reach their parry after hit punish very far. For certain characters I have, this is just hitting medium as far as I can and it would solve my problem entirely. Therefore, my job here is to work out how to follow up that defense, because the defense itself is not hard to do, but the entire reason for not doing it before was that it's too hard to actually follow it up. And this was something we were discussing before, generally how to make the most out of deflect as quickly as possible. This ties in everything else that was mentioned because there are specific supers that allow you to get stuff off that. And others that seem as if they would, but really don't, especially if you've done the deflection twice.
Are you ready? Fight it out!
This is also a game where if you can force your opponent to think about the neutral a lot, they lose a lot of their capacity to do certain things. And in the case of Omni Rabbit, generally, he's just going to defend most of what I do. So if I want to play fairly against him, I have to not do this. Piccolo in particular is terrifying with that particular way of dealing with things. Because nearly everything Piccolo can do here leads easily into this because the opponent can't risk hitting buttons. Kid, on the other hand, has the same problem for many people. He's good at moving in. Fortunately, after most of his moves, he only gets this sort of thing against characters with stubbier buttons. But he can put you on edge quite a lot by forcing you to deal with this, especially since if you do the Dragon Rush, you tend to go over certain attacks. So let's see what happens when all of that is applied. But not as linearly as it has been demonstrated. Alright, alright, go.
行くよ17号分かった分かったよっやっ俺たちの惜しかったね高いかな出さないぞやっ食らっときなこいつはどうだいどうしたもっと楽しもうじゃしっちゃ行くよ17号分かった分かったじゃあねバイ交代か分かっていてもすぐ終わりだ
So what you're seeing now is the fact of a lot more focused defense. Coupled with a stronger need for moving in on the opponent. You're trading one for the other. However, this has just as much of a counter as anything else I've been forced to do so far. The reaction part, however, is about the same.
Android
18! Win!
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね。
Time to begin the match!
他人の気がしないな。
Are you ready? Fight it out!
So when you decide to play this game as a beginner, those are the options you have to think about probably the most. But not in the binary way of, is Super Dash good or bad? Is Dragon Rush good or bad? While it's not necessary to go immediately into learning a bunch of complicated stuff for your character, you do have to think of as much complicated stuff as you can manage to get out of just Super Dash, Vanish, generally universal things. Especially since a lot of this game is spent relatively far away from the opponent. There are many knockdowns and many moves that put your opponent basically as far away from you as possible. And understanding how to move forward from there and just how far to move can be an extremely important part of your game plan. If you tend to do the same thing all the time when very far away, your opponent is probably going to react pretty fast. And once they've caught on, you want to not get stuck in the trap of shifting to not really doing anything when far away, because that's just as bad. So similarly, it's not really about whether or not you have a character that has a way to get across the screen more, but rather that by having that way, your character might be able to make people who are used to dealing with just Super Dash or Vanish have to think about something else, and therefore automatically become more dangerous. But you can't just do that move and expect it to be difficult for them to react. Usually the reason why it's hard to react when you just do that move is because they're so used to reacting to different things. Eventually they will catch on, and once they've caught on, you're back where you started, having to use things that you probably aren't as familiar with because you've done that. So once you move past the fact that, oh, this game seems easy, if you've ever thought that yourself and then didn't realize why you were getting beat up, it's presumably because whoever's beating you up either has an even stronger mastery of their combos, or specifically has spent some time trying to understand this type of thing. And it's hard to argue against it, because the game does specifically tell you in the tutorials this is the sort of things you need to understand and focus on. They teach you to Super Dash, and they teach you to use Dragon Rush and similar things. They don't specifically teach you how to space yourself, but it is quite clear that you're supposed to be using those as best you can. Basic awareness of where your mix-ups are actually mix-ups and where your opponent has basic defense that will just work against both sides is probably the next level to go to. But even that won't get you very far until you recognize how to get your opponent into the spaces you want. It might decide whether you win or lose. Your ability to identify and recognize those scenarios, but it isn't specifically making you better. Because it is quite often that avoiding a bad situation doesn't help you unless you were playing poorly to get into that bad situation to begin with, and therefore you can focus on playing better to avoid it. Recognizing, for example, that you are able to continue a combo or not continue a combo increases your damage output, which makes a heap of difference until you reach the opponent who is able to prevent you from ever getting into the positive side of the situation. At that point, your ability to recognize the situation no longer matters if they have control of it. The Vegeta-Trunks matchup is actually a good example of this because Trunks is able to keep Vegeta pinned down when close, and Vegeta is able to keep Trunks away from him almost indefinitely. Trunks can vanish, but raw vanish does not do that much for Trunks. So Vegeta can basically go, you know what, I'll stay over here and give you stress, and I'll take that damage all day. There's no need for me to approach you. Leading to the situation where, as much as you understand that it's a bad idea to be on the other side of the screen from Vegeta as Trunks, until you can figure out how to make yourself get in safely, the Vegeta player still has complete control of the situation. Your ability to recognize the situation has not changed anything. And as you can see, Raw Vanish, as demonstrated there, puts Vegeta back at the other side of the screen again, so you've basically not had any benefit at all. Fortunately, Gohan is way better at dealing with the whole I'm on the other side of the screen problem. So from here we'll be seeing a switch in the characters played from the Just Vine side, mainly because Kansuki Dynasty will be taking over.
Sadly, it seems you may need to just hang tight a bit. It seems we don't get spectator mode since we were in menu when they started.
Well, that's fairly easy to correct. There's just no rematch after this one. Sia will have very little to say about the matter.
この俺が時間稼ぎをしてやる。
Get ready. Fight it out.
覚悟はいいか。終わりだ。覚悟はいいか。甘い。覚悟はいいか。宇宙の塵にしてやる。分かっていてもそんなバカな。全力でいくぞ。やろう。特に言うべきこともないな。
Astro Boy. So generally, the best way to deal with an opponent who feels as if they know more than you is to play as defensively as possible. The problem with this is that any opponent who realizes this will then, in turn, play as defensively as possible from their own side. And then it just comes down to who has the better ability to do mix-ups once they've gotten in. Because when you are playing very defensively, it gives both sides a lot of time to think. And the player who is more likely to just hit buttons when they see the opponent approach when thinking is the more likely player to lose. If you're that sort of player, it helps to have characters like Adult Gohan whose buttons in that situation are particularly strong. Or at least likely to catch your opponent doing stuff that otherwise you would not be able to punish. Oh, it's not catch.
All or nothing. Let's go.
So what I'm going to end up doing is building up an understanding of how far and how fast I can move forward before it triggers Kazuki Dynasty's tendency to react to stuff, and then see what I can learn to do at that spacing that comes out in my favor. From her side, I don't have a specific suggestion as to how to deal with that, because it's not really an easy problem to solve mentally. Gohan is an easier solution to it, as noted before. He does have a lot more ways of making sure that he doesn't end up in bad situations when he does that. But the way that changes the situation for me is to either force Gohan out, or generally spend more time pushing on Gohan in ways that I don't use on the others to create the same problem. This isn't really something you can get around, and it's part of the reason why playing against players who are technically higher level than you leads to frustrating situations because it feels as if you're making progress, when really they're just practicing something that they're setting you up on. For example, they're building up enough meter so that none of Gohan's solutions work, but not making that clear as I go. The result of this is that if a player who is more familiar with fighting games starts off at the same moment you do in a game, fighting against them will lead to situations like this where you are able to take advantage of things they are testing to do a lot of damage. But the damage is all you're getting, and it tends to lead to the situation turning against you very fast in the end. You shouldn't be generally too discouraged by this, except if you were somehow invested in the idea that despite knowing that this player is normally better than you, you seem to be keeping up with them in DBFZ. It'd be better to generally ask them what it is that they're doing or thinking about. That they intend to use to get past you. Especially if you are not easily able to work this out yourself. For example, in the Gohan case, you have the problem where he takes meter to do his absolute response. But furthermore, and which is much more important in this matchup specifically, it's not specifically that Gohan can be baited, but that if you actually stop attacking, he really doesn't have that many options. Basically, if I now, even with him in that form, stop attacking as much with it, there's not really much Gohan can do. And Vegeta Blue say has a similar problem, though just not as bad. Because while I'm taking damage here, I know which ways Gohan does damage to me that bother me, and the ways that Gohan does damage to me that don't bother me. That, for example, doesn't bother me. Clipping me with lows, clipping me with that, is not going to generally lead to a problem, because I'm looking for the moment where it gets messed up, and therefore I can win.
Let's go!
Boo has the same problem where, for example, it's very hard to advance on Piccolo, but the ways that Boo needs to defend against Piccolo, Piccolo generally wins them all. In fact, it's easier for Piccolo to not even fight Boo, and just bring in someone who's functionally better at doing it. And this will primarily happen specifically because Boo is so incapable of putting pressure on Piccolo to make him not leave. Forehand and hit have the similar interaction. And because Gohan can't actually see a lot of hits approaches, it doesn't come up at all. Did it too early and therefore did not get the repel. Vegeta has a better chance against Piccolo because he has so many other options overall. But in the end, what he's waiting for is for Piccolo to get frustrated, which doesn't have to happen. But we're still back to the same situation. Hansuki Dynasty is pushing to get control of the fight. But that really depends a lot on the timing of my defense rather than the specifics of her offense. And we'll rematch one more since...
Are you ready?
So my goal here is obviously defend better so that all the stray things she does when I'm approaching get converted into me doing damage instead of her doing damage. Characters like Boo are particularly good at this, but if you decide to just do something that they don't deal with well, the situation shifts fairly fast. Similarly, when you get into a situation where your opponent thinks you're just going to keep attacking, and they finally understand that you have that style, the likelihood of them figuring out a way to deal with that increases exponentially. Because if you watch carefully, Hansuki Dynasty's approach to this is basically hit buttons. or in this case, do super. And it's effective, but it's effective because of the expectation of the other player that you're not going to just keep doing that. As soon as you face a player whose expectation is different, who actually thinks much less of you, for example, you will run into more problems. This is something that the team works through with all their characters, with almost all their games, and generally spend quite a lot of time thinking about.
Get ready for battle!
A concept that comes up relatively often in fighting games, basically called binary offense. You're either on or you're off, and generally what you're thinking about is either it's time to attack or it isn't.
Are you ready?
Once again, the problem being that opponents who have particular perspectives already about what you're going to try to do change this really fast. Because they get to spend a lot more time thinking about the spacing and recognizing when they should or should not be doing certain things. Whereas most of the time, the binary offense player is stuck in a situation where all they really get is damage from unexpected hits. It forces a very heavy reliance on the combo part of the game in a way that leads to poor execution later on, actually. For example, OmniRabbit is actually completely aware that doing that much leads to nothing good. It's a good counter for a lot of stuff that Hit does, but Hit has so many options to deal with it that going for the Dragon Rush is the least rewarding thing you can do. And generally, if you have two options with mild risks, and one option which is working because your opponent expects you to choose one of the other two, you're probably not doing the right thing in the long term.
ないんだね。あんたも未来の私も。
もしもっと腕を上げることができたらまた相手になってやると言っておいてくれ。
Android 18 win.
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね。
お願いしますピッコロさん。
Get ready.
覚悟はいいか。今度は本当この野郎。
まだもっと楽しみ。やっそっちの方が
And as this game is extremely fast-paced, keeping up with everything your opponent thinks is a good idea is obviously very hard. That one work? Yes, it does. That's just a matter of understanding the mix-up. Please remember, everyone, that once you get Sparking Blasted, you can do extra combos after that, like that. But once again, you generally shouldn't fear this too much because the way that damage works in the game doesn't actually let that get to hurt you that much. And once again, you see right there that moment where Unrabbit switched from I am on offense to I am on defense, and then back again. There's not usually a heavy need to be thinking too much about your opponent's mix-ups in those situations. This is true in almost all fighting games. If your opponent has been on the defensive for a long time and gets a chance for an attack, you should probably go for your strongest defensive option immediately out of the base up if you're facing a beginner and you for some reason really need to win. But it's not just beginners. This factor takes forever to go away because it's a product of the human emotions in fighting games, not so much the fighting games themselves. For example, I don't really mind how often he hits me with his level 3. Or that. Because eventually what happens is that I just get out and the problem is solved. His character, on the other hand, gets worn down over time through this. And if I switch from offense to defense randomly mid-combo, the emotional shift has already happened. For example, if Piccolo has a really strong defensive option in that situation, I should just use it. But here, I should be in defensive. I should have been in defense mode already because I knew he would be. He's already in the mindset of, okay, it's not my turn anymore. I should wait and defend until it's my turn again. Learning to recognize this is more important in this game than in a lot of other games. Learning which thing you do that switches your opponent is also important. For example, I've learned here that generally doing certain combos against Gohan will cause him to move into that state. And therefore I just have to put in a specific amount of delay between the combo and the attack. But here we have Sparking Blast, which means that the chances are that offense is coming. And I really shouldn't hit anything because I should know extra offense is coming. Similarly, I shouldn't have done anything there because that's the mindset that my opponent is in. Now they're on defense and are not thinking too hard about how they can seriously do damage as much as before, which I can take advantage of and shift the fight.
Android 18, win!
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね。
初めから全力でかかってくるんだな。
Are you ready? Let's go!
But in the end, all of that is part of me trying to explain how exactly to get good from the perspective of thinking about the game rather than being able to execute things in the game. And the reason all of those things matter is because the more capable you are of understanding the offense and defense flow of the game, the more time you get to spend doing that one thing that I mentioned when I was facing Gohan with Pit. Understanding when the damage you are about to take or are risking taking isn't that big a deal. Because once you've reached that point, it becomes more possible to feel confident that you can come back and win even when 1 or 2 exchanges, even up to 5 exchanges in most games, don't go in your favor at all. You could have 5 consecutive interactions where everything goes wrong, but the faith that you understand enough about the situation or your opponent to just bring all that back and have the next 5 to 10 go all in your favor and win.
初めから全力でかかってくるんだな。
Ready? Let's go!
And every new game one plays resets many players to that first feeling of, I don't know what's going on, I don't know what I'm doing, the game feels unfamiliar. But the important thing that gets taken from you in that situation is the confidence that you could make a comeback, that you understand what damage means when a situation is you losing out because your opponent did a good thing versus your opponent doing a crazy thing. And while this is about both understanding your options and their options, it's also about understanding tendencies. Interpreting the meaning behind different things that happen. For example, as you've just seen, Raw Vanish in this game, as I mentioned before, is relatively hard to deal with, but it doesn't hit that hard. And it seldom changes the situation too much. It can help you catch an opponent off guard, it can help you resolve a situation where you didn't know how to deal with them from far enough away. But if you just use this as a thing in neutral to go, okay, I might get something off this, I might manage to hit them. Unless that hit is going to finish them off, they're probably entirely capable of shrugging it off. In certain situations, your character's main auto combos lead to the same thing. It's not that the auto combos are bad or that you should be looking for different combos, but rather that you should be thinking about what the auto combo can give you. Rabbit, for example, has been working on the idea that auto combos can be used to swap which character you want. Trunks is particularly good at this. If Trunks lands his auto combo correctly, he not only crosses the opponent up, which makes him good at getting out of bad situations with corners and so on, but he has quite a few spaces in there where he can do swaps, depending on the speed at which it's confirmed that he landed the hit. There you see it taking Vegeta up into the air. So he, for example, was working on how can I be sure that certain Krillin combos I have will land when Krillin gets swapped in. And Trunks has presumably at least one timing where you can do the swap and it will work.
Are you ready?
So I'm going to tell them to keep on at it. I don't specifically need to play at the moment. Do remember that if you want to join in, you're free to do so. We are in US East Coast lobby number 2. Ring match arena. Well, ring match lobby 02. As always, standing outside of Kame House. Passcode 2717.
様の力はこんなものじゃないぞ。
Are you ready?
An additional note for those who aren't familiar. The vast majority of moves in this game are by design not actually punishable. In most fighting game notation, this is what we call being very minus, where your opponent gets to hit you and you cannot defend in time at all. The producer explained that the reason for this was because they wanted people to feel able to try out moves to do what they wanted to do, but defending after doing a move is entirely different from pressing any button whatsoever after doing a move. Any attack you do has a certain amount of startup. And while most of the normal moves in the game have decently quick startups, they don't all have a lot of range. The special moves in the game tend to lack quick startups relative to many other games. So it creates a situation of being relatively safe if you ever decide to stop attacking. But if you decide to stop attacking, it becomes your opponent's turn to try their own attacks. Occasionally you've seen spaces in matches here where neither player is willing to press their offense much. One of them does a combo, the other blocks. The defending player then starts their own combo, which the original offensive player blocks. And it continues like this for a bit, until someone decides, you know what, I'm going for it. I'm going to try to hit them again. Because I think that they're going to stop defending and let me get another hit. The interaction between that moment and the various ranges that the characters end up at after doing things is the method that was chosen to make this game interesting, according to the interviews with the developers and the producer. So if you enjoy a game in which you are basically generally safe after taking your turn, but safe does not actually mean you get to do anything, this is a good game to get used to. Even if you tend to use the safest form of attack, unlike many other games where your opponent will walk forward and throw you, Dragon Rush in this game starts up slowly enough that if you're really dedicated to defense, you should be able to catch your opponent attempting to Dragon Rush at you most of the time. Generally, the problem comes when, due to being very close, and certain similarities in visuals for moves, the character is stuck this way. They can't actually decide to try to move away immediately. But they can't just keep on attacking either. It puts you in the most uncomfortable situation possible relative to other things.
初めから全力でかかってくるんだな。
So now let's move on to the part of the stream with a bit more advanced discussion. And looking at some of the less played characters, well, less played according to the last popularity poll I was aware of. Note this interaction. As a character, Gohan's not particularly good at dealing with his own stuff in the mirror. Eventually the two Gohan will get far apart, and then their interactions will be based on a lot of trying to predict where the opponent will be and attacking there. This is because Gohan's moves are generally good at stopping you from getting close to him from far away. But he's not so good at closing the distance if the opponent is moving around. They don't specifically have to be moving toward him. Trunks and Vegeta, on the other hand, are, as is the tendency for this family, completely the opposite. They both have moves that cover a lot of space while they're approaching, making sure that the opponent can't take certain actions, and that they're free to do more or less as they like. The opponent must wait until they're done, or use very, very specific counters to their moves. Usually with a relatively tight timing of reaction. While they can't specifically be considered mix-up characters without their meter, once you add their meter, they do have quite a lot of options there. There, in fact, is probably the key interaction between the two. They both did a move to move forward, and really did have no effect on each other at all. Similarly, the short ones here have a problem where they end up close to each other, but neither one wants to move because they're so aware that the other can quickly act on their attempt to move away. Whereas if you move away from Gohan, you might get hit, but he's probably not going to do a lot of damage. You get freedom to move, but not freedom to close in. You'll make your life fairly miserable if you attempt to close in on him without thinking hard enough about it. But Vegeta and Trunks, all this dancing around happens as a result of them basically being able to decide at any time, I'm coming for you, you can't do anything about this. It's not true that you can't do anything, you just have to be really good at doing it. Which can give Gohan a relatively large advantage over Trunks, because that situation will happen. Trunks does something that other people normally have to deal with in a very complex way, and Gohan just uses his power to push him off altogether, and Trunks has nothing he can do from there. Interestingly, Krillin is not specifically worse at getting in than most other characters. Which actually means that he's fairly good in this match against Gohan. Partially because he is so good at moving around without necessarily committing to an attack. He can fake a lot of things and make Gohan react, but there's nothing he can really react to. And knowing that puts the Gohan player on edge, allowing Krillin to do simple things like that. Approaching completely unorthodox ways that would otherwise, if done on any other character, have immediately triggered the Gohan player to just power up to Super or something. Looks like the Just Fine side will be switching characters again though. I'm probably ready enough.
The battle's about to start. Good luck.
So I'll get in one match before I go back to talking about that. I'm sure I've had enough to say about my characters for today.
Are you ready?
And since I haven't repeated it yet this week, please note that Dragon Rush gives you a ton of vigor. Taking your chances to build that up when you can are a relatively big deal. Especially since it's very, very likely that your opponent will spend at least some time in their knockdowns and so on confused about whether or not they should be taking certain actions. giving you the option to do it. Similarly, if you feel as if your opponent is watching for it, you can do it very early with no intention of catching them after certain knockdown combos, which will in fact lead to them not being able to tell for sure what you were trying to do.
Android 18, win! The battle's about to start. Good luck! Get ready!
終わりだ。覚悟はいいか。甘い。何終わりだ。受けてみよう。多いな。惜しかった。何行くぞ。無駄だ。こいつは俺のターゲットだ。来い。皆さん全体こういう攻撃もある。これはどうだ。こちらだ。 今の構えは俺は成長を続けている。来るか。見せてみろ。ここへ頼む。ターゲット排除。急所は外した。しばらく目を覚まさないだろうな。
So after watching people play a little bit longer and going over some of my previous matches, I had basically figured out that there were two things going on with the way I ended up choosing to recover my in-air state. And basically I have two modes currently that I do basically without thinking too much, and I'm really glad Rillian pointed out earlier in the evening that I use Super Dash a lot as one of those options. The reason why I choose Super Dash is because on block I still technically know where I'm going to end up. If you pick a different option, a lot of the way that you have on landing is up to your opponent because they basically can move. And that is sort of a scary thing for a defensive player like me. I like having control of where my spacing is. But when I thought a bit harder about it, I realized that this is a lot like how in Street Fighter you have different wake-up options. You can choose to quick rise, which puts you at a certain space and timing. You can delay rise, and your opponent basically has to wait, and you are put in a slightly... If they're expecting the quick rise, you can put them off in their footing a little bit as a result, and less ready to punish your rise. Or you can back roll, and if they were pursuing you on that quick rise, you can possibly whiff punish them depending how they chose to do their meetings. So, in Dragon Ball, as we were first starting to learn the game, and what I'm realizing now is sort of a need to extend the lesson that I was first learning in training mode, basically, is that a lot of the Oki, or Wake Up, if you are newer to fighting games, happens in the air. A lot of the moments where you're deciding how to recover are there. But this means that on the person waking up position, you actually do have a way to see where your opponent is, see what kind of mental state they're in, or have a read on what you expect their flow to be if they want to go for a quote-unquote meaty. And respond accordingly. It's a bit character specific in all games, but it's definitely something you can learn. So my main goal right now is basically to learn where I am in relation to my opponent in the air situation. And from there, instead of always super dashing and having a really predictable space, learning how to challenge my opponent's own sort of wish to punish my wake up, per se. Also, dash up throw does not work the same way in this game, and it's a really bad habit of mine, which I need to fix.
大人になって一緒に戦うなんてなんだか不思議な感じですね。
It's all or nothing. Let's go.
さてとこの程度か。 お前たちはどこか遠くへ避難している。そう受け止める勇気があるか。なんて力で行くか。そらそら敵に行くぞ。どうなっても知らんぞ。あらっそこか。やとどめだ。これ以上好きにさせるぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に消え去ってしまえ。楽しませてくれよ。どうだ。さあこが。計算だけでわかるもんじゃない。俺たちサイヤ人はな。何が目的かは知らんが、俺が貴様を信用することなどない。 はい。
二度と吸収させてたまるか。こう見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
It's time to face your opponent.
So against Rillian, some of my other issues come up a bit more frequently than how I wake up and recover. For Rillian, it's more so the ways I choose to continue pressure and to get in on the opponent.
It's all or nothing. Let's go.
As you can see, she plays characters that are very good at doing nothing, which is pretty hard for a more defensive player to get in on. Because doing nothing basically leaves to both players basically staying fairly safe in the neutral. But at some point, especially if you are at the life disadvantage or meter disadvantage, you're going to have to get in, and not always in the safest ways. But because we are both defensive players, and because Rillian plays very good characters for not doing anything in particular, and countering whatever comes, it can be very easy for her to react to my getting in because things are so quiet in between. So my challenge, given the characters I play, is mostly to not necessarily be more active, but I definitely need to vary the way I approach. Otherwise, I'll never end up getting Part of the main challenge, and what I've found most useful for helping me against Rillian and the players with the characters she uses, is something that I think she mentioned on a previous stream, which is using my auto combos in neutral to give me a different way to move around, and learning what those help me do on block. Cell in particular has a fairly nice auto combo since Rillian plays Hit, who has a counter, so I can create a situation that most characters in this game do not get to do, and that is bait Hit's counter with their light auto combo, because the end of Cell's auto combo is a throw. But even though Rillian does not cause this situation as often as, say, Omni Rabbit, I really cannot slack against her with my air recoveries. As you may have noticed, I've been doing the back air recovery quite a lot. In Street Fighter, this is basically the equivalent of always back rolling. But if your opponent knows you're going to back roll, then it does not serve its purpose as well as it should, because the usefulness of back roll in Street Fighter is to mix up the spacing and timing of your rise such that your opponent whiffs their meaty. But there are, of course, meaties for back rolls. And your opponent, if they see that you're doing that over and over again, can just go for the back roll meaty. And then you're stuck wondering why you're taking a lot of damage, or maybe you know exactly why you're taking a lot of damage. But the point is, you lose that wake-up option. You lose the unpredictability. And doing so, you lose the ability to control your own spacing and timing against your opponent.
Get ready. Let's go.
We're coming to the end of our stream. Probably after this set. We've all got different things that we pick up on to take back to either training mode or just think about before the next one next week. Same time, same channel, same lobby. So with that, enjoy this last set of matches. And if you didn't make it in this week, don't worry. Next week, you'll be up again. Normally we choose to whether or not we are going to close the round at this time or in about half an hour to 45 minutes from now, based primarily on who's been around and who is still around at this time. So even though this isn't East Coast lobby and we're not expecting a lot of West Coast or Midwest players to join in, if you don't have the option to play before around this time, you can still get in some matches with us. Just try to get into the lounge before 10 Eastern, and we'll know to keep it open a bit longer and see what we get. If Dragon Ball Fighters isn't your thing, stop by on Tuesdays for Guilty Gear, on Mondays for Street Fighter lounges, and Wednesdays and Fridays for other things that we do for Street Fighter content. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Our webpage is at 2-mk.org.
Good night, everyone. This has been 2MK signing out.